The officer from Brooklyn, Minnesota named Ken Potter was found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter for fatally wounding a man named Daunte Wright. It's very unusual for a defendant in a criminal case to take the stand, but she took the stand and completely, totally broke down on the stand. Here's part of her testimony.
You were focused on what you had done, because you had just killed somebody. Right?
I'm sorry it happened. I'm so sorry.
Ms. Potter, from your reaction today, and from your reaction on your video, you didn't plan to use deadly force that day, did you?
No.
You didn't want to use deadly force, did you?
The objection is overruled.
No. No.
Because you knew that deadly force was unreasonable and unwarranted in those circumstances.
I didn't want to hurt anybody.
As you can see, she clearly did not intend to shoot this man. She thought the gun was a taser. She even said, "Taser, taser," and then found out it was a gun and shot and killed this guy. And by the way, this does happen. Here's a headline from USA Today. How could a gun be mistaken for a taser? There have been at least 16 incidents of weapon confusion since 2001. And Daunte Wright, it says, was at least the 4th person to have died as a result. End of quote. So it's tragic, it's unfortunate, but it does happen. And Officer Kim Potter was not a rookie. She'd been on the force 26 years, had never used her gun before, never used her taser before, had been well trained, which shows you in the heat of the moment when you have to make a split-second decision, even an experienced officer can make a mistake. And it was a mistake, not a crime. Now here's how CNN describes the facts of the case. Wright was pulled over by police in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, for an expired tag and an illegal air freshener. During the stop, officers learned he had an outstanding warrant and attempted to arrest him, but Wright pulled away and tried to drive off. Now, Potter, who resigned after the shooting, had her former supervising sergeant, who was at the scene, testified. And he said she would have been justified in using deadly force, let alone a taser, because she thought, and he thought, that Daunte Wright was going to pull off the car with him hanging on the car. And so he felt she could have used deadly force, let alone the taser. Obviously, the state had a use of force expert who testified to the contrary. But the point is, isn't that enough reasonable doubt? The man resisted arrest, tried to drive away. Her supervising sergeant at the scene said she could have used deadly force, let alone a taser, and therefore it was a complete and total accident, not a crime. Now, when the trial was over and Kim Potter was convicted, the Attorney General who brought the charges, Keith Ellison, had a press conference. And here's part of it.
So I wish nothing but the best for her and her family. But the truth is, she will be able to correspond with them and visit with them no matter what happens. But the Wrights won't be able to talk to Daunte.
As I'm watching the press conference, I said, is anybody going to have the cashews to ask the parents? When Daunte Wright was a child, when he was being raised, did you ever tell him if the police ever stop him, if he ever has an interaction with the police, to comply? But of course, nobody asked that question. Right now, inflation is at 40-year highs, and looks like it's here to stay because here's the government's dirty little secret. They want it. I mean, think about this. Right now, inflation rates are higher than the interest on Treasury bonds. So with every day that passes, the government owes less on this mountain of debt. I mean, imagine if your mortgage had a negative interest rate. Would you be in much of a hurry to pay it off? Exactly. So your pain is your gain. What to do? Protect your savings now. Hedge against inflation with gold from Birch Gold, because the government is literally sabotaging the value of the US dollar. Birch Gold is the only company I trust and recommend for precious metals. They will help you convert an eligible IRA or 401k into an IRA backed by real gold. Now that's peace of mind. With thousands of satisfied customers and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, you can trust Birch Gold to help you protect your savings. Go to birchgold.com/Larry right now to get a no-cost, no-obligation info kit. This comprehensive 20-page guide reveals how gold and silver can protect your savings and how you can buy them under the umbrella of a tax-sheltered account. So do it right now. Go to birchgold.com/Larry. That's BIRCH gold.com/Larry. Let's talk a little bit about Daunte Wright, shall we? This is from the Daily Mail. Headline about Daunte Wright. He was either going to be imprisoned, kill someone, or be killed. How Daunte Wright led a life of crime and violence before his death and shot his own friend in the head, broke into a neighbor's home, and robbed a woman at gunpoint. The 20-year-old, according to the Daily Mail, was involved in the shooting of two of his school friends, a home burglary, and previously assaulted and robbed a woman at gunpoint. A man named Caleb Livingston, 18 years old, was shot in the head at a gas station and was left to die in an incident in Minneapolis in May 2019. Caleb, by the way, suffers now from a traumatic brain injury, respiratory arrest, and is bound to a wheelchair, cannot speak, and requires 24/7 care. His mom, by the way, said, "I have mixed emotions about Wright being killed. Part of me is content knowing he'll never be able to hurt anybody again. But part of me is angry because he will not be held responsible for what he did to my son." Another woman said that Wright assaulted her, pointed a gun at her in an attempted robbery in December 2019. And in 2017, Wright was arrested and charged with felony first-degree burglary of an occupied dwelling after breaking into his friend's parents' home. The Daily Mail adds, quote, "Through court records and interviews with the victims, DailyMail.com can exclusively report that Wright had led a life of crime and violence before his death, having been involved in the shooting of two of his school friends, as mentioned, a home burglary, and had previously assaulted and robbed a young woman at gunpoint," end of quote. The man was not exactly a paragon of virtue, was resisting arrest, driving away, possibly taking an officer with him, and once again, Kim Potter's supervising sergeant at the scene said that she could have been justified in using deadly force. It clearly was an accident. This woman never should have been convicted of a crime. And that brings me to another incident. This one took place in North Hollywood. A 14-year-old girl was shot and killed by the police because the police were responding to calls that there was a man assaulting shoppers at a store in North Hollywood. The LAPD assumed the man had a gun because those were the reports they had and they were responding to. Here is a video of what happened.
The chaos here happened just before noon on Thursday. The LAPD responded to calls from the Burlington in North Hollywood. Officers say when they arrived, they went into the store, saw a man assaulting a woman with some kind of metal object that they've described similar to a chain bike lock. At some point soon after finding the suspect, you heard one officer there fire 3 shots towards him. One of those shots hit and killed that man, who we now know is 24-year-old Daniel Elena Lopez. Another one of those shots went through the drywall past Lopez and hit 14-year-old Valentina Oriana Peralta. She was in the fitting room trying on quinceañera dresses with her mom. Her mother was next to her when she died.
Once again, the suspect refused to surrender. Again, the police assumed he had a firearm, and they shot him. They killed him. Turns out a bullet ricocheted off the floor, went through a papier-mâché wall, and killed a 14-year-old who was in the dressing room there with her mother. It was tragic. And regarding this young man in North Hollywood, here is how News One, which is a black publication, put it. Here's her headline. Ben Crump, an attorney, criminal attorney, representing family of young teen killed in reckless LAPD shooting at department store. Reckless? And Ben Crump tweeted, "A stray bullet from an officer's assault rifle struck and killed the young lady." How do you know it was an assault rifle? Maybe it was, but how's he know? More importantly, there is a former LAPD detective named Cheryl Dorsey. She's a frequent critic of the LAPD. And after this incident, she was on either CNN or MSNBC Hee-Haw. I watch them both so you don't have to. And I just knew she was going to trash the officer, and the host expected her to. But here's what happened.
Well, we have to first acknowledge that the officers were responding to a Code 3 radio call, which is the highest priority call that we respond to. That means red lights and siren. And en route to this call, they're being told now that there are shots fired somewhere within this department store. Once we see the officers get on scene, we see them do a great job tactically of communicating, getting organized as they prepare to enter the location, and are communicating, planning what they're going to do if and when they encounter this suspect. Now, we now know that the suspect had in his hand a chain with a lock on the end of it. And I would imagine that as he was viciously beating this female victim with this chain and lock, it probably sounded to the witnesses like shots were being fired. And so that's what was in the mindset of these officers. They're going to encounter an armed individual. We also saw them try to find out as quickly as they could whether or not there were patrons within proximity to this suspect. And then as they entered the second level where he was alleged to be, we hear the officers communicate. LAPD, we're coming up. Make yourself identifiable if you can hear our voices. And at some point thereafter, they encounter the suspect. Now, we can see on the video that there's some distance between the suspect and now the victim who's on the floor. And there's a large rack of clothes, which won't really provide the officers with any concealment, which means if the suspect is armed with a handgun, as they believe, and if he were to take a shot at the officers, they could be struck because the only thing between the officers and the suspect is really distance and clothing. And so when the suspect sees the officers, we see him duck out of the eyesight of the officers. And I'm assuming that they believed he's armed and he could fire the weapon at us. And so the officer who had the ability to take a shot did so.
So here you have a former LAPD detective who frequently criticizes the police for engaging in systemic racism, completely justifying what these cops did. But once again, the man did not comply. And he too led a life of crime. Here's what ABC Channel 7 said. Suspect in North Hollywood store shooting that also left teen dead had long criminal history. The suspect, 24-year-old Daniel Elena Lopez, had an extensive criminal history that included an arrest and guilty plea for domestic battery and, wait for it, fleeing from police. Virtually every single one of these incidents, from Michael Brown to Daunte Wright, to the man who was just shot and killed in the store by the LAPD, virtually every one of these incidents would have been avoided had the suspect simply complied. Let me just say it one more time. Comply, you won't die. What is it about these suspects that cause them to run, that cause them to refuse to comply? And when you fail to comply, bad things are going to happen. And I don't believe Kim Potter ever should have been prosecuted, let alone convicted. More officers have been killed this year than last year. Many people are refusing to comply because of the false narrative that the police are engaging in systemic racism, and it's making things worse. For all you criminals out there who enjoy my tapes, I know you're watching, comply, you won't die. I'm Larry Elder, and this has been the Larry Elder Show for Epic Times.